Hello and welcome to AWS Security Live. Good morning, good afternoon, possibly good evening, wherever you are. We are a live stream security podcast, and we broadcast out at 8 to 9 p.m. 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific time if you're in the US, 3 to 4 if you're in the UK, and 4 to 5 if you're in our European area. So welcome to AWS Security Live. My name's Rob Hale. I lead AWS's security partner business. So I glue together all the different areas of our strategy as we help customers to solve security challenges. I am, as ever, joined by my amazing co-host, Margo.
Hey there, Rob. My name is Margo Cronin, and I'm a security and compliance specialist SA working with AWS all across EMEA. And so I often work with our partners on customer sites. So it is really nice to get to chat to them in this forum as well. And please, join in. Tell us where you're listening from. We're across YouTube, Twitch, and LinkedIn at the moment. And you can join in on the chat. It's that way, actually, on my monitor, if you have any questions for our guests. And Rob, the last time I saw you, we were running through Philadelphia Airport.
We were indeed, yep. So where was the last time we were at Reinforce in Philadelphia? The last time together, but you've been traveling all over the place. So without breaching any confidentiality agreements, what was the last city you visited?
The last city I visited, so right now I'm in Zurich, and the last city I visited was Milan, which is really nice actually, because you can jump in a train and come up, and or sometimes as well with Paris as well. That's also really nice. But I'm pretty excited because we have in Zurich coming up the Zurich Summit actually in September. So it'll be nice actually. We're not streaming the show, unfortunately, from Zurich, but I'm going to fight for that, I think, next year, Rob. I'm going to fight that we
awesome.
get to Zurich. Who do we have joining us today?
We have an amazing partner and an amazing guest. So we have Mario Espinoza, and Mario is a Chief Product Officer from Illumio. So let's bring on Mario. Hey Mario, welcome.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Hey Mario, tell us about Illumio. How does Illumio help our customers secure their environments?
Absolutely. So Illumio, it's a cybersecurity company that has like a different approach to cybersecurity. So we oddly believe that it's very hard to avoid breaches, that breaches are going to happen no matter what, especially in today's environment with AI. So what Illumio does is to prevent those breaches from spreading. So we attack as the breach as it is moving within your infrastructure.
It's interesting, actually, our CTO, Werner Vogels, is famous for saying everything fails all the time. And as architects, we often say, if you design for failure, you're ready, right? So if that event were to occur, that event that none of us want to happen in your environments, but if that event is there, you're kind of good to go, right? Excuse me, if you're designing with that event in mind, you're good to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's we think about resiliency, right? So we think that the system should be resilient, should survive, attacks, and hopefully without them being a disaster. We believe that a breach doesn't need to be a disaster if it is contained immediately.
And how, like at a practical level, how would like a customer, like an AWS customer, be using Illumio and Illumio Insights?
So the first thing that we help our customers do is to understand their environment. And we build what we call a security graph. So this is a very cool capability. It actually uses and leverages AWS infrastructure, the richness of the information there to create a very neat graph. So we read network flows, and we also read information about resources, and we connect them together. So we can even visually show you how your environment looks like, but more interesting, how all communications are moving throughout your infrastructure. And with that, we can not only bring observability, right, the understanding of the environment, but we can actually stop the breaches from moving in a very simple way.
Yeah,
so that's quite different from what a lot of people might have a view of how their architecture is supposed to work. I guess what you're doing is you're validating this is actually how our applications are working. This is the routes that the traffic flows across our infrastructure.
Yeah, you will be surprised how hard it is for organizations with thousands, hundreds of thousands of workloads running to understand how their applications communicate to each other. They have an idea, a general idea, but actually looking at dependencies, right? So, for example, when customers are required by DORA regulation to understand their dependencies, they say,
Yeah.
"Oh my gosh, how do I, navigate through this hundreds of thousands of workloads?" Right? So Illumio uses AWS infrastructure and information to simplify that and put it in front of you in a pretty picture, if you say.
I think I might have said before in the show that, like, before, resiliency was very much, something like the architects and the security guys spoke about. But now resiliency is increasingly becoming a legal topic with concepts like DORA, and you've got the governance people, and you often feel quite sorry for, customers who maybe previously they were just dealing with it in their IT teams, but now need to demonstrate to their governance departments and to the strategic departments, hey, we're ready for DORA and we're good to go.
Just for our non-European audience as well. So DORA, you may have heard the acronym. So DORA is the Digital Operational Resiliency Act.
Oh,
I've got to get
yes.
that right.
Yeah.
And I probably still haven't got that right. My co-host is a compliance expert, so she's just about to prove me wrong.
Yes, that's true. It's not Dora the Explorer, that's for sure. Yes, Digital Operating Resiliency Act, I believe. I'm so used to it at this stage. I had forgotten it was an acronym.
Everything's an acronym, but that's for financial services. But you also have within Europe, you have a Cyber Resiliency Act as well. So both of those are looking at digital and operational resilience. So it's not just around security; it's also around how resilient your services are to failure, whether intentional or otherwise.
Yeah, it's very interesting, if I may, related to that, right? So you talk about resiliency and compliance, and we got to that, but when we started with active attacks, right? So our DNA comes from very, very complex attacks, like, let's say Midnight Blizzard, right? That can attack very large corporations that are very sophisticated and get into the networks and lurk there for a very long time. So the question was, can you detect those threats that are unseen by others? And how do you do that? So if you look at how attackers normally operate, they have this concept of graph, right? So they only look at one node in your network and what are the connections from that node. And they only need to find one jump from that one connection and they move to the next. And they do that over and over again. But the defenders on the other side, they have problems because they operate in what we call lists. They have this very long streams of alerts, right? It could be thousands of alerts. We all heard about the alert fatigue, right? So the security practitioners will feel that very, very strongly, right? So there is an asymmetry of the tools. So if you have attackers working with this very fast graph, and you have defenders going through this very long list of thousands of alerts, the defenders are always going to be behind. They're always going to lose. So we look at the attackers and we say, how do we allow defenders to also have those powerful tools? And we build that graph that the attackers used to use. Now the defenders have that graph.
That's super. That's so true, because when you the more you talk to practitioners and the more you delve into life within security operations, everything is a list. Whether it's that massive list of vulnerabilities that is dumps on the developer's table for security, and you must fix these vulnerabilities, or whether it's alerts from IAM system or any of the other systems, or threat detection alerts. It's just lists and lists and lists that you then have to prioritize, and that's a very different mindset to how an attacker views. That really, really resonates with every security professional that I've spoken to.
What is the outcome, and why now? What outcome is Illumio driving for your customers, and why now? And by the way, I do want to remind people, please ask Mario. It's so cool to have an expert like this on the show. Please ask Mario any questions you might have.
We are open to your questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you a story, and then you're going to see the outcome, right? So we were called in one of those situations where a very large, sophisticated organization was under one of those terrible attacks, right? And they say, hey, I'm trying to contain this attack. It has been there for months. And how do I detect the attack? How do I see it? I cannot see it because the attacker is jumping and moving so fast that I cannot stop it. So in terms of outcome, the question was, can you bring this observability of my entire environment? So I want to know if there's lateral movement. I want to know if there is data center to cloud communication, if it is subscription to subscription communication, if it is a container to container communication. So essentially what we did was to ingest all that information from, let's say, VPC flow logs automatically. By the way, AWS helps us because it makes it so easy. We connect, we use the APIs, we connect to the VPC flow logs, and all the stream of information is there. But now AI is the key because the volume of data is so big that it is very hard to manually process that. So what we do is we put AI on top of that and we build that graph. What is the outcome? Now we detect attacks that are otherwise unseen. So we can say, hey, there is an attack is using, let's say, TeamViewer, right? That is a tool that attackers use often. And it's going from your data center to your VM running in AWS and then trying to access a PaaS database inside AWS. We show all that path. And also with one click, we allow you to block it all because we use the underlying AWS security tools, let's say network security groups, and we adjust those security groups on the fly automatically, blocking the attacker so we can quarantine any workload that is detected as malicious. So complete observability of your environment in minutes and also blocking the attackers on the tracks using AWS native security tools.
I think that's amazing. Like you've got the remediation there, the automation around the remediation for the environment, because oftentimes that is a customer's main pain point, right? They're like, we have all of this information. Maybe you've given us these tools and red, amber, and green to prioritize the information, but now what? So you're actually automating that for them. Can you actually show us what this looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a peek into this.
And as you're setting that up, we've got Cisco, and I hope I'm saying your name right in the comments. And he says, or she says, they say, IOCs should be FOSS, and too many security companies don't do that. So Cisco did not get the acronym message.
So it indicated the compromise should be
beer.
Software.
So Cisco will buy the beers later on.
All righty. So we can take a look at how Illumio Insights build this graph. That's a security graph. So I don't want to walk you through the product functionality, but actually I want to share a story, right? So how this is being used. So the most important concept is think about the graph. What are the elements of the graph? You look at flows going from, let's say, your infrastructure to malicious IPs. So we will automatically identify flows of, let's say, HTTP, SSH, FTP control, TeamViewer, immediately going to all these malicious sites without you having to track individual alerts. And we'll put it in front of you. One of the things that Illumio has done from many, many years is, collect what are those protocols that people use for lateral movement. So let's say RDP, TeamViewer, Rustless, all of these are tools that you shouldn't have in your environment unless you have a very explicit need. Illumio identify those automatically, and we will tell you, hey, you seem to have this risky protocol running in your environment. We talk about regions, from what country to what country. We talk about the DORA compliance. We will see LLM traffic. Maybe you have LLM traffic that you did not authorize, right? So somebody maybe install one of those, LLMs that you can put it in any part of your infrastructure, and then using that with the risk of data leakage. One of the most interesting thing is the risky traffic path. So in the risky traffic path, let's say that, and this is a real case, right? When one of those attacks, we find TeamViewer in your environment. The next question that a person will have is, okay, what roles of the workloads are being involved? So what is this really touching? And Illumio uses AI to do that. So we automatically scan millions and millions of workloads, and we tell you, hey, this is a database, this is a BitTorrent servers, this is a Postgres database. And we will look at the traffic over time. We'll say, hey, this is exfiltrating data, volumes of data, right? This is not just beaconing. So let's say that you find this VDI 001 Illumio. So let's go to that, and I will click on that, and you will see automatically what this security graph really means. So you're seeing in real time here the communication between these different services, right? So EC2 instances, for example, go into some VMs, or even multi-cloud communications. So the most interesting thing is that, hey, you can not only see what is flowing through the data, but you can also do a one-click in dynamic quarantine. Remember, Margo, that I said, hey, with automation, with the underlying infrastructure, we can block all communication, all traffic outside from this resource, allowing critical services and allowing incident response teams to go and connect through SSH. Does this make sense?
I love it. Tell me, do you have, I can imagine then as an organization, you get incredible insights into threat intelligence that you kind of start to see before it hits the press, before information is out there, across all of the organizations, that you can actually see within the payload, maybe information about these actors. Is that information that Illumio can share with the wider community? Maybe, for example, with the DNS provider that's hosting the CNC server?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we actually do, we create what we call the decorated flows. So essentially, you will receive source IP and port, destination IP and port and protocol, and then we are more than 100 different metadata elements, including what you just described, including the threat information about that, and that threat information goes into that flow. But we do more than that. We also geolocate the information. We also look at what applications are running. So a lot of this is something that customers have been trying to do for a very long time manually. So they actually have internal projects trying to connect and stitch together all this information at a very tremendous high cost. And Illumio does it for them, right? It connects all of them right away. So yes to the thread question, yes to also other type of metadata that goes into the decorated flows.
Love that. I love the you mentioned earlier, and we didn't zero in on it, but you mentioned data going to LLM. So data going to large language models, so generative AI, for example, that may or may not be authorized. So is that something you're seeing customers pay more attention to in terms of monitoring their risk posture?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we launched Illumio Insights, we initially didn't have this shadow LLM dashboard that I'm showing you, and a customer came to us and say, "Hey, I'm having concerns about people accessing, let's say, DeepSeek, for example. Can you guys monitor that? Because how do I know that I have millions of workloads running, right, in multiple clouds and on-prem data centers, and how can I guarantee that they're not going and posting company information into the DeepSeek or any other shadow LLM, not authorized LLM?" So we had all the flows. We have this AI powered graph. So we created a classifier that actually discovers not only DeepSeek but any use of LLM. We presented. Then the next question the customer asks is like, well, how much data is going there, right, in terms of flows or bytes? So we can in real time find that. But you can also find what is the exact resource that is sending that information. So LLM governance is a very important tool, and Illumio brings that to the table.
I like that approach, and I've spoken to a number of CISOs, so Chief Information Security Officers, and security operations people, and one of the things that they kind of struggle with is, look, we want to enable use of approved, secure, and compliant generative AI or other AI tools, but the challenge is always, well, how do we enforce that? But how do we enforce it in a way that we're not doing a blanket block on everybody where people will just find ways around it to be productive, but we can make sure that we are providing access to the secure and compliant version without exposing ourselves to further risk?
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges of the cloud is that you can create workloads so quickly and so fast, and that, of course, is fantastic because of the agility it brings to organizations, right? Using the AWS infrastructure, they can, launch applications at a pace that they couldn't do before. But they all tell me that they lack observability. So that's the keyword, right? So I cannot observe what is happening in my environment, right? So detect the good from the bad, right? So how do I find those needles in the haystack? And we believe that the answer is the security graph, that the answer is to put AI on top of that graph that connects all the workloads and bring that governance information, as you said, Rob, but also security, knowing what's happening in your infrastructure. And the goal is to do this a fully automated way, right? So you don't want manual steps. So in the case of Illumio, you just connect to the AWS APIs, and we ingest all that information for you, and we present it in a easy to digest way. And then with the underlying AWS security tools, we can automate that. So by the way, Illumio uses all the controls that AWS already has. So you can imagine us like a sort of orchestra director of those, right? So we can turn this one here on, this one here off, with all the visibility that we put in front of you. So you leverage your security infrastructure in a easier way.
I love that message about the integration with AWS services, because sometimes that's confusing for customers, right? They might be like, hey, I'm already using Security Hub, or I'm already using Detective. How can I use Illumio with that? So that's a really good clarification. There's some love coming in the chat and some questions, if it's okay, Mario, if you feel comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely.
You.
So actually, the first question really works in nicely with what you just said there, Margo, around native tools and in LLMs. So I'm going to paraphrase this slightly, but Anhani asks, would DNS analysis also need to occur to be able to detect LLM usage? I think that's quite interesting, given the integration with some of the AWS native tools, whether that's Route 56 or GuardDuty, for example. So are you using DNS data?
We do. We actually use extensively DNS data. So we take every IP that we see in the VPC flow logs, right? So we load AWS VPC flow logs, and there will be like a connection between an IP and another IP. We use a massive database of DNS to resolve all of those. So we actually can tell you if you're coming from an internal AWS container workload and going to a known malicious, for example, workload. The first question the customers ask, is it a known IP or unknown IP, right? And when we DNS, we say that. Is it one of my trusted IP, my trusted partners, or no? And we do the same.
And the next question, maybe the producer can share again your dashboard, because Rev036 is asking what insights are shown in the DORA compliance dashboard, and can you explain it a little bit more? And yeah, I mean, for me as well, so many of my FSI customers, there's so many meetings now about DORA. What do they need to do? So, and I noticed it here. It's under Insights. It's in preview, and you've got a little DORA compliance tab, which I'd say would receive a lot of love from FSI.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did was when we show customers that are subject to DORA compliance, we show what the map, right, the graph. They say, whoa, this actually solves could solve a lot of my DORA requirements, right? So let's say Section 4, Article 6 of the regulation, right? So regarding unencrypted services and communication. So we were able in the graph to extract that. So we can give you that right off the bat. So saving you, hours, days, weeks, sometimes months of work to find that information manually with queries and stuff. The most difficult part is dependencies. What are the dependencies of the critical system? But we have the dependencies in front of us because we have the graph, right? So this graph is the gift that keeps on giving, right? So you can extract different things. So even, other customers that are telcos, they say, hey, I could use this graph to detect when my telecommunication links are down, right? Because I will see anomalies in those communications. So you can get more out of the graph. But in the case of DORA, yes, absolutely, we can give all that information directly. And the beautiful thing is that you can then click on one of those and see immediately, right, the traffic map and what's going on in real time. So this is very powerful for DORA. We have some partners like global system integrators working with us that they say, hey, if I use the Illumio graph, I believe I can answer 100% of the DORA questions, right? So that's a third party, a global system integrator that is using Illumio for their customers. They say, hey, we can do all of the requirements with this graph.
Mario, if we were to give you our magic wand, and this is the magic wand that you can fix one problem that you see over and over again, maybe with customers, or maybe you don't see it over and over again, but it's one of the most painful problems, what would it be?
I think that the biggest problem is that we believe that we can stop the breaches, that they will never happen. And because of that, we don't prepare ourselves for the case where a breach actually happens. So if I had a magic wand, I will, create this awareness, across the board with the security practitioners that it's okay to prepare for the case where a breach happens. And it's okay, it's actually mandatory to be resilient for that case and to assume that a breach will happen, but prepare to contain it in such a small scope that it will never become a disaster. So breach will happen, it will not become a disaster. That would be my wish.
I guess that's the difference between having a security event and then having a breach, right? It's about blast radius and about what you do when something happens. And we see that so often with customers. It's better to focus on segmentation and reducing that blast radius, and then practicing response. Because I was talking to a CISO a couple of weeks ago, and they said, look, we can have the best laid plans in the world, but if we don't constantly practice them and find out how they go wrong, then when the event does happen, then that's when the trouble is going to start. It's much harder to try and troubleshoot something like that. So I really love that approach.
Yes, thank you so much. And I agree with that 100%, Rob.
Mario, thank you for joining us today. It's really been, I loved the demo, first of all. It was really insightful. Definitely got a lot of interest, especially in terms of DORA compliance. And thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. And if our visitors if our viewers want to try Illumio, then there's a link which will be popping its way up on a QR code, so you can. There we go, as if by magic. That's right. So yeah, it'd be great to have you. And go and try Illumio. Let us know what you think.
And Rob, who do we have coming up next?
So we have an amazing speaker. We have Woland from Cisco Duo. So we're going to be talking about identity.
Excellent. So we have the next show coming up in a couple of minutes. Please stay. And the big green owl, right?
Don't go away.
Hi, and welcome back to Security Live. Security Live is a show streaming on Twitch, YouTube, and LinkedIn, focusing on AWS and AWS partners, talking about, hopefully solving, all things related to security challenges that you might be facing. Each show, we're lucky enough to bring on an AWS partner to discuss security topics with us, and you can join in the show. Please use the chat that way, I think, that way, and join in to ask our guests any questions. We stream every other Tuesday from 8 a.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. GMT time, and 5 p.m. CET time. And my name is Margo Cronin. I am a security and compliance specialist SA for AWS, and I work with our partners quite often on customer sites, so it's really cool to meet them in the context of the show. And I am joined today by my wonderful co-host.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rob Hale. I lead AWS's security partner organization across EMEA. So I try and glue together all the awesome solutions from our technology partners, our consulting and managed service partners, and solve customer solutions and customer security challenges. So always great to be on the show with you, Margo. And we've got an amazing guest.
We do. Well, and today we've got Aaron Woland joining us from Cisco Duo. So Cisco, of course, I think it's fair to say needs no introduction. Duo, of course, is the big green owl. Rob, what's your favorite foreign language if you were to learn a language?
Oh, I'm trying to learn Italian at the moment. I'm on day 319 on a certain language learning app that I'm not sure we're allowed to mention.
Well, okay. But I mean,
Unless they want to
in from Cisco Duo, I have to tease him about this. I mean, so Aaron is a distinguished engineer from Cisco Security, and he's going to come and talk to us about how the new Duo directory for identity and access management is built for security and enhances customer security on Cisco and AWS.
Awesome. Let's talk about identity.
With Aaron, hopefully. Oh, here we go. Hey, Aaron. So I think you have to introduce Cisco Duo. I mean, Rob and I, we were talking about Italian, we were talking about German. Rob is being all diplomatic. We've got schizophrenic, I couldn't say it, web developer wanting to know Cisco from San Francisco. Oh my goodness, I need a coffee.
Yeah, coffee sounds good right now. So I'm sure most people on the call hopefully know what Cisco is. We're not the food delivery company. We are pretty much, we form the backbone of the internet. We develop networking. I've been working at Cisco for 20 years now, and with Cisco for 30 something years total. So been around a long time, doing a lot of things. And about 6 or 7 years ago, we acquired Duo, not Duolingo, but Duo. And Duo was mostly known at that point for being a multi-factor authentication product. And since then, it has expanded tremendously into, single sign-on, passwordless, and is now actually a full, what we like to call it, a full security-first identity and access management solution, right? So we actually do pretty much the full stack at this point. There's a couple of things we're adding, but much full stack for IAM.
We just had our Reinforce actually recently there, Aaron. I don't know if you guys saw it, but we introduced it, Reinforce MFA everywhere. That now across the AWS organization, it used to be in the management account, it was enforced, but now also across all other accounts. And I think it's one of the things in the AWS, it's the first thing we learn. The first thing we talked about to customers about is MFA everywhere. So it's so cool to hear you bring it up in the introduction.
Yeah, so it actually is one of the, so I don't know if you can see it in my background right about there. I have a master's degree from SANS in cybersecurity. And one of my favorite courses there was actually on cloud security. And, the first thing they talk about is about enabling MFA. Now, there's a couple of ways to consider it, right? So you can do it natively within AWS and your IAM center, and you're going to be using something called like TOTP, and probably have an Authy app or something on your phone that you're using for that. And you have to keep pulling that out and typing in whatever code is changing based on time on your phone, where you can tie it in with more of an enterprise IDP solution like Duo, right? That it is now a centralized authentication policy, centralized user database, et cetera. So we can see that and control that from a single place instead of every app doing it sort of on their own. So it's a different approach, different control mechanism, and honestly a lot easier than when you're trying to use something like the TOTP apps.
I think that's really important, because when we talk to customers around identity, and Margo is probably having this conversation constantly as an SA, we really don't want people to bring in completely different IDPs and so identity providers and different ways of authenticating users versus the rest of their organization. We need customers to use the tools they have in terms of IDP and then integrate those with the cloud native solutions that your developers are going to be using.
No, absolutely. And it looks like I have to buy the beer for the acronym challenge there. So for the acronyms, right? IDP is identity provider, and TOTP is a time-based one-time password. But it's whenever you have that app that says, put in the code shown to you by your app, right? That is usually a time-based one-time password, TOTP.
And there are a couple of questions actually already coming in, and I'm going to take the opportunity to combine two. I mean, the first one's really good because it kind of gives a bit of context, and shame on my introduction, but somebody's asking like what is Duo? Is it like one-to-one with something like AWS Cognito? What actually is it? And then there's a follow-up question from someone asking, is this potentially a single point of failure? So off you go, Aaron. Rob and I will start in the beginning.
Oh, that's great. That's a great question. Oh, no. So asking if it's a single point of failure was actually, so my boss, who was my boss is a VP of identity and access management at Cisco and was the founder of a company we acquired called Ort. And he just did a keynote at Identiverse 3 weeks ago or something like that about redundancy in IAM. So if you're thinking about what is Duo, it's more, I think, appropriate to think of it as you could compare it mostly to identity and access management products or other IDPs. And examples of that would be an Okta. An example of that could also be an Entra ID. An example of that would be a Ping Federate solution. All right, those would be other products in the same space, either focusing it for first factor authentication, which would be like username and password, or better yet, complete passwordless, right? Or even the second factor, which would be, it could be something like, am I close with this device to the computer that I am accessing this application with, right? And so is my proximity close enough? And am I able to see the code that was just sent to me so I can type that code in or automate it too? And there's some really cool things you can do there, but right, that would be the second factor, right? So in a multi-factor author, you're going to hear me say the acronym MFA, right? Offering, right? And Duo does both, right? It's the first factor and the second factor. A solution like Duo, not just Duo, will also have usually things like risk-based authentication. So the one that everyone loves to call out is they're worried about risky parallel sessions. So Margo may be logging in from somewhere in Europe, and at the same time is logging in from somewhere in California. That one's most often called impossible time travel, which is very easy to get wrong in a world where you have VPNs and termination points all over the planet. Yeah. And a risky parallel session detection is actually more able to say this doesn't look right and it's not following the behavior of Margo normally, right? And it's coming in from an unusual location and so on. That's a little bit more realistic than like the impossible time travel.
Well, I was going to ask, and it's kind of like making a bit of a leap, but in terms of, risks, what about agentic AI and identity with MCPs? Because I think, and again, at the conference that we've just been at, like this is a theme that's coming up, I kind of think everywhere, right? Everyone's talking about MCP. How do you do identity on MCP, and how does Duo help?
The whole human versus non-human identities.
Yes, forget Margo's behavior. That's risky.
Yeah, that's also another really great question. So, and it's the hot term right now too. You'll constantly hear everyone talking about agentic AI. So, as an IDP, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. One is the visibility and the detection, right? So, in our case, we interface with AWS and your logs. We interface with other IDPs and their logs, and we're able to then start showing the logins. We're able to show what access was given to whom and when. So in this case, Margo, if you're using an AI agent, hence the agentic AI, right, you're using an agent to do something on your behalf. So you have to give it permissions. Those permissions, they might use an MCP to find out which API they're going to call and figure out which API and how to call it. But ultimately, it's just that it's an OAuth or open authorization action. So I'm trying to call out all my acronyms here. It's an OAuth action that's occurring, right? That's the authorization that's happening. You have authorized the agent to act on your behalf, right? But then determining and being able to call out from a visibility perspective, is it Margo or is it an agent acting on Margo's behalf, right? And this is, it's not a new concept by any means. We just love to call it new things. So we're calling it like non-human identity is the term you're hearing all the time, but non-human identity has existed for a long, long time. So one of the products I helped create at Cisco is called Identity Services Engine. And it's focused, or most people use it, as the non-human identities of machines and non-human identities of the IoT devices and other things that are accessing a network. But there's also the non-human identity of service accounts that we've been monitoring and worried about forever. And now we just have a new term for agentic AI, but we're very focused on that as well. There's a second half to that, which is that as an IDP, we can be authorized, we can be handling that OAuth transaction, that open authorization, which is the issuance of tokens, right? So there's many different ways of doing that. You can do it where it's within an app itself, right? Or you can do it where it's coming from a centralized, again, identity provider like Duo, where it's actually the one issuing the OAuth token, right? And so there's a lot more coming with that and trying to wrap your security controls around agentic AI and Duo. I can't talk a lot about what we're going to come out with on a public call, but you can expect to see a lot of that on the roadmap based on the things talked about by my boss and others.
Aaron, do not get yourself in trouble with PR and embargoes. That's never a good place to be.
I wouldn't
Not that
be
I've done that, by the way.
in trouble though, so that's what.
Yeah, PR love me. By the way, I used an acronym. I said MCP, so that's Model Context Protocol. Yeah, so I'm buying beers later on, and yeah,
now you have to explain what that is.
Yeah, I can't.
Well, a simple way to think of an MCP server, it's a client server architecture, and the easiest way I try to explain it to people in a couple seconds or less, right, is it's kind of like a directory of APIs that your agents or your code, right, might be able to access and what you can get from those. That's the simplest way of saying it.
Nice summary. I like that one.
Yeah.
Can I ask, and I really appreciate the fact that you flagged that you can't talk about what's coming, but if I was a company and I was getting ready and I wanted, recommendations or best practices and how I can be ready so that my systems and be they agentic or human triggered agents are ready to embrace, to do identity correctly, to do those principles, calling resources, performing the correct actions under the correct conditions correctly. What best practices would you recommend for them?
That's another good question. All right. So you have good questions. One of the things I would start to look at then, or what a best practice might be, is getting an idea around what your IAM footprint looks like. Like what exactly do you have? What do you use, right, in existence today? Is every single one of your applications going to do a separate authorization, or are they already tied into a centralized IDP? Now, again, you could think of the IDP again for authenticating and authorizing humans, but also authenticating and authorizing agents, apps, et cetera. Is it centralized? Are you looking to centralize it? What does your governance program look like? Do you know who has what levels of permissions and where, and what's been over provisioned and what's not, things like that? And we actually acquired a company called Ort We now call their product Cisco Identity Intelligence for things almost exactly like that, right? For getting that visibility in the space. You might call it ITDR, you may call it, which is Identity Threat Detection and Response. You may also call that ISPM, or Identity Security Posture Management, which is trying to give you that view of all of that in your environment now, right?
You are so good at those acronyms. Would you like a job presenting a show?
I don't think I can take any more jobs. I have enough already, and I already work in about 70 to 80 hours a week. So
Love it.
I'm really bad with acronyms, so I'm trying to make sure I'm spelling them out for you.
So impressed.
You mentioned customers are really looking at their IAM policies and procedure, and that's super important. In fact, before even you should be looking at what you're migrating, or if you're migrating applications to the cloud or anywhere else. A lot of customers kind of miss that whole, what state is my identity in? Do we have IAM policies? What's our joiners, movers, and leavers policy like? Because normally companies are absolutely awesome or pretty good at the joining policy, provisioning access to most services because they want people to get up to speed quickly. They're also normally pretty good at leavers because you start to, when somebody leaves a job, you cut their access off. But the movers, that's when you're changing roles. That's where you get that big kind of drift in terms of over provision or just forgotten about privileges and access. And so having those sort of things, right, and having the good identity provision at the start, a good IDP policy is really, really good for making sure that you're able to migrate and scale as you move to the cloud. So what sort of best practices do you have around that whole identity piece as a customer's moving to the cloud, and how does that get really complicated really quickly, and how can you
it does it gets really complicated. And honestly, I know that I'm on an AWS stream. It has nothing to do with moving to the cloud or not. I think it just exasperates it, right? The problem has existed forever and it continues to exist, right? So, and I want to, so a lot of times what'll happen is, so when you're talking about all this, we're usually really good about provisioning access because we want to get access out to our people and let them do their job. I completely agree. What we're really bad at, and what you'll see when we run like an identity security assessment, you will see accounts that have never been fully activated. So Aaron goes to join company X, right? They provision me an account. They give me all my access. I never finish joining. And this happens so much more than you would think. It's crazy. But then you end up with these bunch of accounts that have never been activated. And depending on the IDP, that account may be able to be claimed by a malicious actor later, right? Here's this account. It exists. It's never been claimed. I'm going to claim it. So Margo never finished, or Aaron never finished joining that company. Malicious actor comes in and now they become Aaron, right? And my friend Didi, who was one of the founders of he'll call it a Highlander problem, which there should be only one, which we can come back and talk about. But there is the expanding growth because you change roles and now your permissions have changed. Completely agree with that one too. But then the decommissioning of accounts doesn't happen like you would think it would, right? So where, it's one of the other things that you should call out with an ISPM and an ITDR solution like ours, right? Are these accounts that have never been fully, deprovisioned. Maybe they've been, deactivated in one system or another system, but they've never gone around the entire environment. And that's another argument for the centralization of an IDP versus all right, so I've been doing this a long time. And, way back in the day, we used to have systems that their entire job was to synchronize user accounts out to all the other systems. So if you could think about that, it would be like, okay, I created Aaron in Active Directory, and I now need to go create Aaron in AWS. And I need to create Aaron in, Azure. I need to go create Aaron in, you name Miro, and you name the product, right? We have something like 13,000 different applications at Cisco alone that we provide to our people. Could you imagine if we had to create 13,000 instances of my account, right? It would be unmanageable, right? Especially for making sure that account gets deleted later and so on. So the argument for a centralized directory and just-in-time provisioning, and then again, that centralized authorization, so that my account, when it's deactivated, I can no longer get into that shadow account, if you will, that was created within AWS's IAM, right? And so on.
By the way,
That's a really, really good one.
And again, same products help with that. So for your best practice, right? Implementation of a strong ISPM, right? Identity security posture management solution.
And there's a QR code there. If people want to try out Duo, just use the QR. Yeah, I think you're probing the wrong way, but hey.
Oh, really? It shows
That
the
way,
right way
but
on
it's
mine.
probably showing up over there.
But you're touching on something there, Aaron, that my customers ask me about all the time, which is how do we do identity on multi-cloud? You know, there are customers out there, and even if they want to be all in, you know, they can't, right? Maybe for regulatory purposes, maybe because they have acquired other organizations, they have, you know, grown kind of natively, and as a result have like another cloud service provider come in. And you were talking there, you kind of answered the question already in this, you know, the Highlander, which we love, by the way, the Highlander notion, and we're all going to be stealing that. But what do you see, and what do you recommend to customers doing multi-cloud?
Oh, that's actually where Cisco thrives, right? So, okay, so another really good question. So this is a company that was founded, you know, in 1980, whatever. I think it was 84 for some reason, but in the 1980s, yeah, for you know, so I wish I could say I wasn't an adult yet, but so it was founded way back then, and for connecting disparate networks, right? Disparate things. Cisco's always played this wonderful role of, like, we're not going to be the end all be all of every single thing possibly, right? But we're going to work with all of those other types of networks and join them together, right? And that's what Cisco routers did way back when. And you're talking about technology that doesn't hardly exist anymore, like DECnet and Apple Talk and so on. But I'm getting we're actually, that's the same concepts when you get to identity. We're actually an identity router as well, right? So you know what we do, what again, it comes back to joining multiple things and having a common centralized point that works with everything. So if the like, by the way, just to refresh my memory before joining this stream, so Friday I went and just reconnected to a brand new free AWS cloud tenant to you know, trial, to a free trial in Duo, and I'm like, that linkage is so quick and easy and works so well. And it also works with other cloud vendors, and I will try not to mention their names. But you know, that's the multi-cloud approach. You want to have still a common identity store, common identity policies, right? Common visibility wherever you can, right? And that's, again, where something like Duo or our competitors, right, are going to come into play.
Yeah. Who did what under what conditions? Because we were talking, and as well in the previous show, you know, we were talking about incidents and events happening. But when an event happens, you need to know who did what under what conditions, and that's where, you know, identity is at the root of it all.
It is. So people love to say that identity is the new perimeter, or the, you know, we hear this kind of term all the time. I'm always the one saying that identity has always been the perimeter, right? Identity is the thing that is controlling the access, right, for the authorization into the, I mean, look at all the services AWS has, right? And it's that identity that gets access to anyone or multitudes of those services within AWS. If you don't have a strong identity, you know, foundation to build upon, then you have no security policy. There is no perimeter.
And I love what you mentioned earlier around so Margo, around the previous session we were talking about segmentation and microsegmentation and reducing that blast radius. And then earlier when you talked about just-in-time access, and that's super important when you're not, you know, to reduce and segment access, so reducing that blast radius by providing good segmentation. What you don't want is really permissive access to everybody. You want it just in time, right when it's needed. When it's not needed, it's revoked again. And that's a critical kind of tenet of having, you know, a secure access policies, and making sure that you're only providing access, privileged access in particular, when it's needed.
Yeah, and you want to make sure you do that in a way that is not a denial of service, right? Because then it just gets ripped out and you go right back to having way too many permissions.
Absolutely. I was talking to some folks previously who are developers, and one of the things that they were talking about was the use of native tools. I don't want to have to use this really, really clunky old enterprise system we've had forever. I want to be able to use native tools, and I want to be able to do stuff fast. So if I need access to something, that's got to happen smoothly and natively. And that's
Yeah.
really, really important. If we want to embed security into all of our processes and into our teams, we need to make security the easy option, so friction-free option.
You are going to see a shift. There's already a lot of startup companies out there now, but you're going to see a shift in the IGA market, which identity governance and access, identity governance administration. I can't remember what the A stands for in IGA, but you're going to see a lot of shift in that where it is just for that, right? The just-in-time attribute-based access, right? Things that require authorization and step-ups at different times, revoke the authorization when not needed, because the whole industry is shifting so much in this route, right? It used to be very role-based access control, and that was it. You were done. Your permissions were there, to being more of a just-in-time permission world.
Have you any guidance for customers who struggle with the proliferation of policies and the complexity of policies, and policies just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and harder to understand?
Prayer is a good strategy for that, right? No, it is understanding what that proliferation is a first step for all of it. So I'm gonna just call out again, one of the reasons we acquired Ort to build Cisco Identity Intelligence is for that visibility, so that you can start to see what that is. What is that policy? How over permissive is that policy? And then sometimes what it does take is maybe a shift or a it's a better term for this, but like it's a good time to insert a new technology, a transition time in your environment, or for that policy to shift. And maybe it's to get off of that legacy, tie it in with more modern authentication stacks, and at that point apply a more dynamic or modern policy to that legacy application. So, but visibility is where you have to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think also in the AWS world, we often recommend tools like IAM Access Analyzer, which will tell you which policies are not being used correctly. And there are updates in this just from Reinforce recently, which will also give you information on policies internally, so your resources calling other services. And so, yeah, I think from vendors out there are tools out there to support this notion of proliferation of policies. And I've used it before in the show. I've seen customers do what I call the "oh my gosh" policy, because they get so frustrated, they have no idea what the policy is doing, and they just tap in ****, right? So they're like, let's just get this working.
Yeah, that is, yeah. Permit any is what we would call that back in the day in Cisco world.
You used to cringe when you used to see that in firewall rule tables. It's like, oh, who's put that in?
Yeah.
And okay, and you're getting some love in the comments. Some people are asking for visual learners for a demo. So I think we have to have you back on, Aaron, again.
I would love to.
A demo.
Actually,
go ahead.
If people want to get a demo, there's a handy link that may be popping up at some stage with, I think, access to such a resource.
Yeah, there it is. You've got the QR code back up again. And there's actually a demo.duo.com actually has a lot of predefined demos. There's also I think there should be a link there to something we call Genie on what was called Ort, now called Cisco Identity Intelligence, where you can actually get in yourself with any social account at all, and actually interact and work with the system that I was talking about with like the ISPM, ITDR. Don't need to I already explained what those acronyms were earlier in the session, but that type of tooling. And I know I'm conscious of time, so I know we're out of it.
We're going to be thrown out. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us live.
It's been great to have you. Thanks so much.